Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and 1.0.1 was released for the European server yesterday, and it brings the Italian tech tree to World of Tanks. Now, I streamed for several hours yesterday trying out the tier 4 up until tier 8 Italian vehicles, and while I know that they were available on the test server, good luck trying to get meaningful games from tier 4 to tier 8 on a test server. And I thought today I'd share my initial impressions of the line and maybe answer the question that a lot of people are asking now: where should I start and which vehicles am I going to enjoy and try and focus on, and which ones are the ones that maybe I want to grit my teeth to get through or use some free experience. Now, of course, I recommend trying out all of the vehicles, even the low tier ones, because maybe you're going to find the vehicle that just matches your playstyle. But for a lot of players who worked towards getting the Progetto 46 and have maybe got quite an experienced Italian medium crew already, you might be trying to figure out how much free experience shall I spend and what part of the tree shall I start at? Well, firstly, let's talk about tier 4, which I believe is the first novel tank in the tech tree, and will require you just shy of 7,000 free experience to unlock immediately. So this is the tier 4, it is the P26/40, and what's special about this vehicle is it carries a 75mm with some very impressive high explosive rounds. Look at this, 70mm of penetration and 175 alpha damage at tier 4, and that means that if you manage to hit the looks is not going to be very well at all. Now, of course, the accuracy on this vehicle, not the best. You're not going to be hitting, like, sniping perfectly at long range, but 0.41 base accuracy is still not terrible. And if you can penetrate reliably with these high explosive rounds, you're going to be packing 2,500 damage per minute, which is just simply outrageous. And of course, if you fail to penetrate the enemy tank with the high explosive rounds, then you're still going to be splashing some damage on them. Now, I can't really think of a tier 4 vehicle that isn't really a tank destroyer that gets a big high explosive derpy gun, especially one that has 10 degrees of gun depression and it's got 2.2 seconds aim time. It really does feel like a good all-rounder. Now, of course, there is the M4 Sherman at tier 5, which has that 105mm derp, very famous. But, you know, with that 105mm derp, you've only got 53mm of penetration, I believe, which, while that's still pretty good, when you jump down a whole tier and have higher penetration, albeit much less high explosive average damage at 175, it just seems like a really good performer at tier 4, and I can imagine this thing is going to be the bane of existence for everybody who loves to play Panzer IIJs out there. Look at the side of this looks. That looks is not going to be doing very well. We penetrate both high explosive rounds on the side of that vehicle, which is absolutely bizarre, and yet the tank is still pretty good for splashing, right? Now, of course, if you don't want to use high explosive rounds in this vehicle, you can use armor piercing rounds, which has still got 97mm of penetration, but your alpha damage drops down to 110. And if you dab the 2 key, you can have heat rounds with 130mm of penetration. Again, not too bad for tier 4. But I feel like, why would I want to use the armor piercing rounds or the heat rounds that much in this tank when these high explosive rounds just seem to be doing so darn good? And there you go, goodbye M4. I'm not sure if we actually set that guy on fire there for a second as we penetrated his tank as he managed to go down. We get a huge amount of spotting there as well. Now, the view range on this vehicle, 330 meters, so you probably want to be packing binoculars, but all in all, this thing is really solid, ladies and gents, for a tier 4 tank. Now, it's not going to be the flashiest vehicle, you're not going to be bombing it around, but there's practically nothing you can't do with it. And when you combine that with some decent high explosive rounds on this tank, you can poach down your opponents, but oh, look what happens when you don't quite hit the sweet spot. But we do manage to reload before the enemy P2640. He fires a heat round into us that looks like it actually went through our tracks and our hull. And this is an interesting moment. This is where I didn't actually want to shoot the KV-1 until my tracks went back up. And now I'm going to be firing some heat rounds into the side of that tank, as I didn't do very much damage at all with the first shot. Actually, I did no damage and we only managed to take the tracks off. So the 75mm high explosive rounds, they do have their limits, but for a tier 4 vehicle now taking on a tier 5 heavy in the side, not too shabby. And a couple of premium rounds just to be able to hopefully finish this guy off. Oh, we're going to have to fire another one because not the best roll there against the KV-1. And job done, Top Gun. Nailing an Oskin's medal as well for destroying 3 enemy vehicles that were higher tier than us. Top on damage, top on experience, and while we did fire a few heat rounds, still a decent profit with or without a premium account. So if you do decide to start at tier 4, then once you've fully elited this tank, it's 11,850 experience to advance to tier 5. And one thing that's nice is that the engine is shared between between this vehicle and also the next tank, so you're going to start with that mid-tier engine. However, if you do decide to skip the tier 4 tank, then the stock engine on the P43 is actually the mid-engine on the tier 4. And so that's something you should take into account, that if you spend that 11,850, you kind of save the 830 experience that you'd have to spend on the tier 4. Because when you research the next tank, if you haven't unlocked any of the stock modules, then you automatically research them on all the previous vehicles for free. The tier 5, on the other hand, while it has a 75mm with better penetration, doesn't have those special high explosive rounds that the previous vehicle had, unless you want to use the stock gun on this tank. And so for me personally, the upgrade from tier 4 to tier 5 just doesn't really feel worth it. Your aim time gets worse. Your dispersion when you're turning the turret gets worse, you lose some power to weight, you're a tiny little bit faster, and you do have some okay armor for a tier 5 tank with 80mm, but it just doesn't feel like it's worth it when you have to jump up an entire tier. Nevertheless, it's a tier 5 tank. If you manage to shoot things with its gun, then you're still going to be able to take out your opponents. It's just, you don't really feel like you've got the best gun handling for a tier 5 vehicle, especially one where I think I had 100% crew and I was using spaghetti on the tank, and I just feel like I'm always forever aiming. It's just really awkward for a gun with this kind of rate of fire. Now, the rate of fire isn't exactly exceptional for a tier 5 vehicle, but it's not horrific as well. What the hell's going on there? Oh, my lord, why is that so much higher than the vehicle? Okay, don't worry about that anyway. We're going to get at the kill? Not quite. This is probably a forgettable vehicle along the line, but you will be able to grind through it if you choose to start at tier 5. So if you do want to skip your way to tier 5, it's going to cost you 23,620 experience. But if you want to make the jump to tier 6, now we're talking about some quite high experience usage. 58,230 to reach tier 6, where you're going to be playing the P43 BIS. So the first thing to mention is that if you do decide to skip to tier 6, you get the SPA 242 engine as stock. Now that is the top engine on the tier 5, which would have cost you 1,900 experience to research, so take that into consideration, that if you unlock the next tank, that you're kind of saving 10% of the free experience that maybe you would have dumped on the P43 anyway. So what is special about the tier 6? Well, clearly it is the 90mm main armament that the vehicle gets. It fires 8 rounds a minute, dealing 240 alpha damage. To put it into perspective, that's a better rate of fire than the FV4202 and 10 extra alpha damage, which is very impressive at tier 6. And while the penetration values aren't exactly incredible at 140 and 150 with its premium rounds, it's not terrible. And the same can be said for the gun handling on the vehicle, with 2.4 seconds aim time and 0.4 accuracy. Definitely not the best, but not the worst for such a large caliber gun with decent penetration values. Now, while the vehicle sacrifices some gun depression at 7 degrees, it's also rather fast at 50, but its power to weight ratio is very mediocre, so you're probably going to want to get the top engine on this tank. Furthermore, the vehicle has decent armor, and if you have an exceptionally skilled crew in this tank, you could probably get away with coated optics, but if you don't, then you're going to want to use binoculars. The first thing you'll notice with the tier 6, it does look like the tank that ate all the pies, or shall I be saying has been gorging itself by going home at the weekends and stuffing its face with mom's spaghetti. But my word, this, for its size, it also packs a punch as well. Just look at what we're going to do here to this tier 5 Soviet heavy tank when we manage to get ourselves into position. Is he trying to blind fire around the corner? Maybe he thinks that he's been spotted by the bushes over here. Bit of a sneaky sausage anyway. I just want him to come a little bit further around, and then we're going to slap him with this 90mm main armament. Now, as I mentioned, the vehicle, definitely not the fastest, but when you do get yourself into a position where you can make 7 degrees of gun depression work, it's just going to get a little bit awkward for this KV-1 very quickly. Now, I'm trying to find a position to try and make this 7 degrees of gun depression work and get myself behind the bush, so even when I fire, I'm not going to get spotted. And bam! 228 damage. And look, the rate of fire is just not that bad. It's absolutely outrageous when we think about it. Are we going to be able to put a round into this Cromwell? Well, why not? Let's shoot a medium tank that is 1 tier lower than us, the M4, and just, whoa, that alpha damage. If I was in a Cromwell Berlin or just a regular Cromwell, you know, I'd have to be shooting that vehicle 3-4 times to be able to take it out. This tank in a couple, and we shut down the Cromwell Berlin there with a blind fire through the bush. Bit of a sneaky one. And is that a tier 4 that we're shooting at now? No, that's the tier 5. That's the previous vehicle. That's the P43, the tier 5. And we're gonna 2-shot him as well. This thing's just an absolute beast at tier 6, and it's always funny to me that tier 6 tanks kind of get the same damage per minute as tier 8, even though everybody's hit points are probably like a third of what they are, or even a quarter of what tier 8 are, at least for the tier 5 tanks that we were shooting there. And so for me personally, this tier 6 tank is an absolute sweet spot, and I would recommend keeping this even when you advance up the tree, because it's just a really solid tier 6 tank. Nevertheless, if you want to skip through this tank, you're going to need 128,500 free experience to immediately get the P43 TER. And if you do choose to free experience towards the P43 TER, you're going to have the SPA 343 engine as stock, so that means that you won't have to spend 5,300 experience researching it on the tier 6 medium. So once again, take that into account that you can kind of save yourself 10% by free experiencing through. So far it's kind of been good news, bad news, good news, and yeah, it is, in my opinion, kind of bad news for the P43 TER. It just doesn't really quite live up to the hype that the P43 BIS built. Its alpha damage remains the same, and while 240 isn't bad at tier 7, it's not special like 240 was at tier 6. The damage per minute of this vehicle also goes down if you choose to use the top gun, and the penetration goes up, but really not that much for a whole tier, only by 25. And if you do decide to dab the 2 key, you have 195mm of APCR penetration. And while that's pretty good, tanks like the Comet, I believe, have got 208. In addition, the gun handling doesn't seem to get that much better over the tier 6 for jumping up a whole tier, and while the mobility is clearly better, as well as the armor, it doesn't feel like it's all that much of an upgrade. And while the P43 TR will still be okay for you to play at tier 7, I don't think it's going to be the powerhouse that the tier 6 was. Nevertheless, it's a tank. You can drive around, you can shoot things. You've got a 90mm gun with 240 alpha damage. It feels a bit like a T20 that kind of doesn't have the penetration values or having the 10 degrees of gun depression that the T20 has, and whether the 80mm of all-round frontal protection kind of makes up for that, I'm not so sure. Nevertheless, you can still do quite well in this vehicle. I'm sure some people are really going to even like this, go as far as to like this tank. But for me, I'll probably be sticking at tier 6 for when I want to have this kind of mid-tier Italian 90mm gameplay. However, maybe some of you have been saving up for months and you just absolutely, utterly have to have auto-reloading mechanics right from the get-go. Well then, your only option is to skip to the P44 Pantera. This is going to cost you 253,000 free experience to get to the vehicle. However, there's one very important thing to realize about doing this, and that is look how experienced it would be to elite this tank once you get there. That 250,000 doesn't include using that free experience on the tank to play it as if it was elite, as unlocking all of the modules on the Pantera will require you an additional 100,000 free experience. However, there is one advantage of going to the Pantera, and once again it's to do with the engines. The stock engine is the SPA 344, which, as we can see here, is the top engine on the P43 TER. And so by spending that 100,000 experience to go to the Pantera, you actually skip having to get the engine on the tier 7 tank. And funnily enough, then you're going to be able to unlock the mid-engine on this vehicle while still using the top engine, which, if you're so inclined, you can then use as the top engine on your tier 6. And so if you are a player who is planning to free experience their way towards tier 8, then make sure you then use that top engine on the tier 7 to unlock the mid-engine on the tier 7, and then you're going to have the tier 6 top engine without having to even grind it. However, one thing that I found about the Pantera is that its stock engine is not even all that bad. Even with the worst possible engine on this vehicle, its power to weight ratio isn't a disaster, and its traverse speed is still pretty much 50 degrees a second on hard. And so if any of you are grinding your way towards the Pantera and don't have any free experience, when you do get this vehicle, I thoroughly recommend unlocking the tracks first, then the gun, then the turret, and then focusing on the engines. However, there's a couple of things that I would like to mention about this tank, and that is that if you choose to use the stock gun on this vehicle, you're going to be using the gun that you were using on the tier 7, which is absolutely horrific at tier 8. Even with premium rounds, you're going to have 195mm of penetration. Good luck engaging tier 9 and tier 10 tanks, let alone tier 8 vehicles, with that kind of gun. And even if you do free experience your way to having the top gun, before you get the turret, because that's the only way that you can get there. You're then kind of going to have to suffer because you only have a 2-round magazine to have with your auto reloader. And so trying to focus on getting that turret as well is going to be of great importance, as it will give you a whole extra round to play around with. And if any of you out there didn't quite manage to get your hands on the Progetto 46 and you want to feel that auto reloading hype, or alternatively, maybe you have the Progetto 46 and you think it is your favorite tier 8 tank and you're hoping that the P43 Pantera is going to feel the same, well, there's kind of good news and there's bad news. Firstly, the bad news, the intra-clip reload is half a second longer, and so it will take you 5 seconds to unload 3 shells instead of 4 seconds. However, you carry more ammunition and you've got a much better shell velocity with your standard rounds. But you have worse gun handling, 1 less degree of gun depression, but you're actually faster, which is bizarre for a vehicle which is so large. You can now go at 60 with a 22.22 power to weight ratio, but the ground resistances kind of balance this out. But holy mother of traverse speed, this thing can turn its entire vehicle around in just over a couple of seconds. And in addition to this, it has way more armor, 120 millimeters on the turret, which is going to get you through some more scenarios, but slightly less view range. Yeah, it's both good news and bad news for the Pantera. I'll say personally for me and my playstyle, I would favor the Progetto because you can unload faster with more gun depression and better dispersion values, but it's still by no means going to be a bad tank, and I've been enjoying playing my Pantera so far. And so ladies and gentlemen, those are my initial impressions of the mid-Italian tech tree. I hope this video was useful for you. If it was, please consider giving it a thumbs up, but if you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And yeah, just to recap, Tier 4, I believe, is an absolute sweet spot. So is Tier 6. And obviously, as soon as you get to the auto reload as well, that's the whole reason as to why you would probably be wanting to play this tank tree anyway. And I wish all of you the best of luck in 1.0.1. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.